Okay, well, we're already past start time, so let's go ahead and start talking about voting. Once again, my name is Bill Farah. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Communications for the ACLU of Virginia, and I'm here with Hope Amescada, who's their staff attorney and legislative counsel for the ACLU of Virginia, and we're here to talk to you today about voting in the state of Virginia. So just to start off, let's talk about voting in general. The ACLU is nonpartisan. We don't tell people who to vote for. But we believe that voting is a very important part of a democratic society. Hope, what would you have to say about that?
Sure. So the right to vote is a fundamental right in our country, and it's probably one of the most important rights. Some of us would argue it is the most important right because it's preservative before all other rights that we exercise in our democracy. And the right to vote is your voice to participate in local, state, and federal elections to get your full civic participation out there. And so we have a long history of fighting for that right. The ACLU of Virginia has been involved in many efforts through litigation, through public education, through advocacy, both through the administrative process and through the legislative process to protect and defend that right.
Okay, fantastic. So in order to vote, you have to be registered, right? You have to be actually registered with the State Board of Elections. So some people may not know if they're registered or not, if they haven't been an active voter in recent years. How does one go about finding that out?
Sure, that's a great question. A voter or would-be voter can check their status at the Department of Elections website, which is www.elections.virginia.gov. And there you can click on the registration link, and that allows you to check your status, or it allows you to register online. Okay. It also allows you to update your address in case you've recently moved. And the deadline to register to vote or change your registration information is coming up really soon. It's October 17th, 2016, so this Monday.
And there's some other cool things you can do while you're on that website as well. If you can find out your polling place, right?
Correct.
If you're not aware where to vote, you can find out where your particular polling place is, and you can actually see the ballot. So as we know, this is a presidential election, which is very important, but there are a lot of things on the ballot this year, including some constitutional amendments in Virginia, local races. So that's something else that you can do while you're on the site.
Right, and it's actually a really great way to be prepared for when you go into your polling place, to be fully educated on the candidates, the issues, and to know what your ballot should have. Because in the rare instance that perhaps there's a mistake on your ballot, an election or a race should be on there, you can let an election worker know that.
So I can go online to the state board site and find out if I'm registered, where to vote, and if I'm not registered, I can do that there as well.
Correct.
Okay. What if I don't have access to a computer, or if I just am not comfortable with that?
Sure, there's a couple of different options. You can go to your local general registrar and you can register to vote in person. You can also pick up an application at places like the DMV, public libraries, departments of social services. You can also just get more information about how to register to vote without using the internet by calling the Department of Elections. They have a hotline and it has extended customer service hours Monday through Friday from now until the election. So that number is 1-800-552-9745.
And once again, you still have time. If you're not registered or not sure if you already have until Monday.
Correct.
To figure out if you're registered and to take care of that so you can participate. There's been a lot of talk this year and the last couple of years about voter ID laws. Could you talk a little bit about what the situation is in Virginia legally?
Sure. So a few years ago, Virginia passed its first strict photo ID law. However, though we've had some small elections where it's been enforced, this is the first presidential election in which the photo ID law is being enforced. So that generally means many more people participate in the process. So we just want voters to be aware that when you go to the polls in Virginia this year, you have to show a valid photo ID. And what a valid photo ID means is that if your ID has an expiration date on it, it can't be expired more than 12 months before you got that ID. So for example, that would apply to driver's license.
Okay.
So if your driver's license expired 11 months ago, but you make the cutoff for November 8th or 10 months ago, great. But if it's gonna be older than 12 months expired by the time you go to the polls on November 8th, you gotta get that updated. However, there's also a pretty expansive list of acceptable voter photo IDs that don't include driver's licenses. You may have a DMV photo ID card, simply just a state ID, employee photo IDs from any employer. Let's see, student photo IDs. Now that means from any college or university, and it must be located in the state of Virginia. And that can be a public university and it can be a private university.
Okay.
A student ID from a high school. So many high school seniors probably have, will be 18 and this will be their first presidential election in which to vote. You can use your high school photo ID. Nursing home IDs, US passports, military IDs. And this has been a common problem in the past couple years in enforcing this. You don't have to have an address on that ID when you go and check in with the election workers in which to vote. And that address, if you do have an address on your ID, it doesn't have to be current. You just have to vocally state your registered address to the poll worker. So should an election worker say, well, your ID that you're showing me, the address doesn't match the one in the poll book, simply state that's not what the statute requires, I can vote.
Right. And so those are some of the more common forms of ID. What if someone doesn't have any of those? What can they do?
Right. So for individuals who don't have an acceptable valid photo ID, or they do but it's expired, right? You know, they did have a driver's license. What they can do is that they can go to their general registrar and they can get a free voter photo ID. And all you have to do in that situation is fill out a pretty short form with your name and your address, your social security number, just that basic contact information. What the general registrar will do is confirm, one, that you're a qualified registered voter, and once that status is confirmed, they'll take your picture, and they may at this point, you know, getting close to the election, give you a temporary ID, but what they will do is they'll mail you a permanent photo ID that you can use for the purposes of voting only, but that allows you to vote. And it's really important for everyone to understand that if you don't have that ID, you're not going to be able to cast an official ballot on election day. What you can do, if you don't have a photo ID when you go to the polls, is vote by a provisional ID ballot.
Okay.
But you have to follow up by Monday, November 14th at noon with proof of a valid photo ID. And in situations like that, for individuals who don't have a valid voter ID, you can get one on election day.
Okay.
Now granted, it will be very busy at your general registrar's office, but they're required to give you one if you don't have one on election day. You can go right there and get a temporary one. You can also, you know, and this is a common situation where people go to the polls, they forgot their wallet, and they left it in the car. So it's probably best for you to go get that ID, but let's just say you're coming after work, it's 6:45, there's a long line. It's best to then vote by the provisional ID ballot and follow up with proof of ID with your general registrar, again, by noon on November 14th.
Okay, so the message here is make sure you know what acceptable forms of ID are, take it with you to the polls, but if something happens and you don't have it, voting, you can still vote. It's just provisional ballot. Don't think you can't vote. Go ahead and go to the polls, but it'll be a provisional ballot that you have to follow up on.
Right, and it's really important for all voters and first-time voters and prospective voters. Every voter should know you have a right to vote. You just got to follow up in those instances, and there's plenty of opportunities to do so. So when you do follow up with your general registrar with proof of photo ID, you can do it by email, you can do it by fax, you can drop it off in person. You can mail it, but I would really recommend not doing that because your general registrar needs that proof right away, and there's a very short window for you to get that proof in.
Okay, got it. So also we have absentee voting. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and why someone might need to vote absentee and how they go about that?
Sure. So in Virginia, absentee ballot voting is permissible, but it's only permissible in certain circumstances. Virginia does not have a no excuse absentee ballot status. You have to have one of 19 approved reasons that allow you to vote by absentee.
Okay.
For example, a common one is you have a disability, or you have a work obligation that's taken you out of town, those sorts of things. And the Department of Elections website outlines all of those approved excuses. But what you would do is that you want to make sure you apply for an absentee ballot in time. And there's two ways to get an absentee ballot. You can do it by mail. What you do is you fill out an application, and again, you can get that at DMV, you can get it online, you can download that application at the department's website. And if you want to vote by absentee ballot by mail, the deadline to request that is November 1st by 5 p.m.
Okay.
November 1st. If you want to vote absentee in person, and you qualify, you just go to your general registrar, you fill out the application in person, and then once you're approved, you'll be able to vote by absentee ballot in person in front of the general registrar.
And if you don't know where your registrar's office is, you can find that out also on the state Department of Elections website. It's usually at your local government office, but double check, make sure, go to the State Board of Elections website and find out where that is if you're not sure.
And you want to double check your general registrar's office hours. So there's many localities throughout Virginia who have smaller staffs. It's my general understanding that before a presidential election, all registrars in the state of Virginia have uniform hours and full-time staff. But in other times of the year, they have part-time staff. So it's important. You can also get your general registrar's information if you don't have access to the internet, just in your telephone book if you have that.
Yep.
Again, you can call the State Department of Elections hotline
Okay.
and get that information for your general registrar. It's also important to note a distinction between voting absentee by mail versus in person. When you vote absentee in person, you have to show proof of photo ID.
Okay.
When you vote absentee ballot by mail, you don't.
Okay, great. Some people also may have heard about something called curbside voting. What is that?
Sure. So if you're an individual with a disability or otherwise qualified, you can simply have your friend or yourself drive up literally to the curbside and request from an election worker to vote curbside. And what they would do is that election worker goes inside the precinct, they bring out a machine that's completely accessible for someone with a physical disability to be able to vote in their car.
Okay.
But to that point, if somebody really, cherishes standing in line and going inside the polling place, every person with a disability has a right to vote within the polling place. And every precinct is required to have an accessible voting machine that allows people with a variety of disabilities to be able to vote on an equal playing field with everybody else.
Okay, great. So one other thing we wanted to talk about is restoration of rights, having your right to vote restored if you're someone who may have had that taken away as a result of a criminal conviction. This has been very controversial. It's been in the news a lot the last few months, and it's kind of confusing to some people if you haven't really followed it that much. The ACLU has been in favor of mass restoration of rights that, as the governor executed with his executive order back in the spring. But let's just talk about the situation as it is right now. If you fall in that category, you think you might fall in that category, what do you do?
Sure. So over the last few months, there's been a lot of confusion to the process, and it's changed. As it stands today, for individuals who want their rights restored, or who have recently gotten a letter from the governor letting them know, hey, your rights are restored, what you're going to want to do, for the people who have received their letters, and it's a letter from the governor and the secretary of the Commonwealth letting you know that your rights have been restored, what you want to do is you're immediately eligible to go out and register to vote by any of the means that I just described. If you're someone who's unsure, right, like we said a few months ago, the governor issued an executive order restoring the rights of hundreds of thousands of people, and now that is not the case. So until you know your status, do not register to vote. But you can find out about your status a couple different ways. You can go to www.restore.virginia.gov, and on that website, that'll bring you to the Secretary of the Commonwealth's website. There's a link there that you can check your status, and it asks for your first name, your last name, and the last 4 digits of your social security number. And what that will do is try to look you up in the state's database. And for some people, that'll probably pop up as a status of your rights have been restored. So according to that, you can go register to vote. It might say pending action or status unknown. So in those instances, what you want to do is call the the Secretary of the Commonwealth, and they list a phone number on that website for people to call. It's really important for people who don't appear in the state's system.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably because the nature of your conviction was maybe a decade or 2 decades ago.
Sure.
And the state simply just does not know about you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what you're going to want to do is there's an online link on that same website that allows you to insert your information that basically says, please consider me for restoration of rights. Or you can call, or you can mail in a form with your basic information about where your name, the name in which you were convicted under, your social security number, and your address, and it puts you into the queue for people to get their rights restored. As of today, or yesterday rather, the governor has restored 55,000 people's rights since the court decided he wasn't authorized to do it by executive order. So, but it's really important to make that request fast. Again, you can't register to vote by the deadline unless your rights have been restored. And it's really important for people who want to know, well, am I eligible for rights restoration? There's a couple criteria, and it was the same as the executive order he issued months ago.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have completed your any term of incarceration you may have received. So if you didn't get a term of incarceration, you've satisfied that criteria, but you've got to be out of jail or prison.
Mm-hmm.
And 2, you have got to be released from supervised probation or parole.
Okay.
And those are the 2 qualifiers.
So what about if I have fines or fees that haven't been paid?
Oh, not pertinent for the purposes of restoration of rights.
Okay.
Of course, you still owe those things to the court and to the victim, but for the purposes of voting, they are not relevant.
And forgive me if you said this and I may have missed it, but what if it was a violent offense? Does it matter if I'm if my offense was violent or non-violent?
No, it does not matter. So the governor has issued those are the only 2 criteria in which a person has to satisfy. He's not making a distinction between so-called less violent and more violent crimes.
Okay, so it sounds like if you fall in that category, there may be a little bit of a process. You
Correct.
need to find out some information and maybe go through a couple of steps. But from folks that we've talked to that have done that, we know what a big deal it is
Right.
for those people. So.
Right. It allows people to feel like a full member of society and participate in civic life. And I would also say that if you call today or you email today and you don't get a response by October 17th, it doesn't mean give up.
Mm-hmm.
This administration, this governor, Secretary Thomason, are very much committed to restoring as many rights as possible so long as he's in office. This is a really key issue for his administration, and it strikes to fundamental fairness in Virginia.
And it's your right, so do that. Regardless of your status, please vote in this election. Find out if you're registered or not. Make sure you know your polling place. Take your valid ID and check your status if you have been convicted of a felony offense in the past. What else do we need to talk about voting today?
Well, I think it's really important for people to understand that if you need assistance when you're voting, that you're completely entitled to that. You shouldn't feel rushed inside the polling place. If you make a mistake on your ballot, you can ask for as many ballots as you like.
Okay.
Going back to the assistance, if you do need some assistance from a friend or a relative or an election worker, you may have to fill out a form that just says, I'm asking for assistance. No big deal there. Let's see, other important issues that people should know. Can you wear campaign apparel inside the polling place,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, I think that this election is
It's a big
season
day. People want to wear their colors, whatever those colors
Right.
are. Mm-hmm.
So you can wear your candidate's t-shirt into the polling place. You just can't electioneer in the polling place. And what that means is that when you're standing in line to check in, you can't be screaming, vote for this person or vote for that person. But you have every right, you have a First Amendment right to free expression to wear your campaign materials promoting your candidate or issue of choice. I think that another important thing that people should understand is that if you have a complaint, if something happens to you, the first thing that you should do is notify an election worker and the chief of that precinct. Most problems can be resolved pretty quickly, but if they can't, please call the ACLU of Virginia's hotline, which is 804-644-8080, where ACLU of Virginia staff will be ready to help voters with problems and be able to assist and help you resolve those problems so that your vote is counted.
Great. So one other thing I just wanted to ask about that's kind of new, you mentioned free expression, and so the question has come up, this being social media age, what about, can I take a selfie at the polling place? Is that legal in Virginia?
It is. So you have a complete First Amendment right to take a selfie with your ballot.
Because people might, we proudly wear our stickers. I can understand why people might want to do that.
Yeah, and we really would like to encourage folks to share that with us and just share the fact that you're participating in our great democracy.
And hopefully by telling your friends, just with a sticker, that will encourage other people to participate in democracy as well. So we're happy to take any questions if there are any of those who are watching.
Yeah, they have a few questions.
Okay.
You can read them on the.
Let's take a look.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question. I recently moved and I'm unsure if my registration was switched to my new address. Is there a way to easily check this? So we talked about this a little bit, but.
Right, so what you're going to want to do is go to www.elections.virginia.gov, and under registration, check my status. You can insert the necessary information and see if your registration application's been processed and your information is in the system. You can also call, if you know your new general registrar in the city or the county you live in, you can also call them to make sure.
Okay, that's a great question. Here's another. Can an individual who is registered to vote provide their ID and not their registration form as long as they are voting at their designated voting place?
Well, I think I'm a little bit confused. So you don't need to show a registration form or that registration card that you get in the mail from your general registrar once your application's been processed. The only thing you need to show, or generally how voting works in Virginia, when you get up to the desk where the election workers are checking you in, someone will ask you to state your name vocally and your address. Though new for this year, you don't have to say it orally. You can write it down, and then they're going to ask you to show a valid form of photo ID. So there's no obligation or requirement to show a registration form. You simply have to say or write your name, say or write your current address where you're registered, and then show a valid photo ID.
Okay, great. We have another here. I'm moving back to Virginia on the 24th after the voter registration deadline. I'm leaving before early voting starts in my current state. How can I vote?
Okay, so you've got one of two options. In your current state, if an absentee ballot process is available to you, you may want to just go ahead and try to vote in person via absentee ballot process.
Okay.
If that's not possible in your current state, it is completely legal for you if you know where you're moving to. For example, you say you're not moving to Virginia until past Virginia's registration deadline, but if you have a known address in Virginia, you can sign up and register to vote from now until the 17th.
Okay.
So they will process your registration application by then. I would encourage that person to find one of those two methods that works best for them, but it is completely acceptable and legal to register to vote in Virginia so long as you know your new Virginia address.
Okay. And the person has actually responded that they called to ask that question and were told no. So it would say they'd probably need to call back and relay the information that you just stated.
And I think that if the person asking this question could contact us privately, that would probably be great, because I actually confirmed with our State Department of Elections what one should do in that situation. So if you're getting conflicting information,
The registrar may be confused.
Right, exactly. We definitely want to clear that up in time for you to register to vote or vote by absentee ballot in your current state.
Okay. Here's another. How do I confirm that my application was processed and I am indeed registered where I think I should be? I registered online with the DMV to tell them my new address, but haven't gotten a card. It's been about 3 weeks. I think it's the same answer,
Right.
correct?
And I think that, unfortunately, a lot of times when people register to vote through the DMV, sometimes there's a lag
Takes
time
right.
in processing. So what you're gonna want to do is one of two things, or both. Check www.elections.virginia.gov and go to the registration link. And there's a link that says check my status. And if your status information is showing up as processed with your new polling place, your ballot, your address, then you're good to go. You might also want to find out your local registrar and call them and just say, hey, I just registered to vote, I did it at the DMV, I just want to double check and make sure I'm in the poll book.
Gotcha. Well, I think let's see if we have one more question. Why doesn't Virginia have an actual voter card? Anyone know it's just a piece of paper? Interesting question.
Well, I think that before Virginia enacted a strict photo ID law, they had previously changed our general ID law back in 2012. And the state actually took the money, part of $2 million, to send a new voter registration card that people could use as a form of ID to everyone in the state. And I think it's probably just a budgetary issue as to why it's a piece of paper as opposed to a plastic card. But it's really important for voters to know in this election, this first presidential election with the strict photo ID law, those cards are no longer acceptable forms of ID.
Interesting.
They're informative pieces of paper that tell you your precinct and where you should go and the address, but they are not acceptable photo IDs for voting.
I find the poll workers generally like it when I present that at the polling station, but as you said, you don't have to have it. It doesn't.
No, you don't have to present it. I think it's helpful, when you first move or you first move to Virginia, that you've got this piece of paper that tells you, and especially for individuals who aren't active on the internet or have a smartphone where they can quickly look up their polling location. They're helpful pieces of education materials, and I think that the state does a good job in getting that out there. But again, unlike the law in 2012, not an acceptable form of ID.
Okay. Well, Hope, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us about voting in Virginia. You've been very helpful and expert knowledge as always. And to those of you watching, thank you for joining us. If you have additional questions, feel free to contact us. We'll say that number one more time.
Right. So the Department of Elections has a customer service line, and it's expanded hours from now until the election, and that is 1-800-552-9745. And you may also contact the ACLU of Virginia with any questions at 804-644-8080.
And additionally, most all of the information we've discussed today is on our website, acluva.org, including links to registration and all those external links that Hope mentioned. So thanks once again. Please get out and vote.